This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Laddick, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in EdTech, spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver effective, customized, and engaging learning experiences for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the eLearn podcast. My name is Laddick, as you will hear ad nauseum, or at least you maybe have already heard ad nauseum. I'm with a company called OpenLMS, but as I say always, this show is not about me. I'm very excited to have my guest here today, Josh Kamrath. How are you today, Josh?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. You know, we have guests from all around the world on this show. Where do we find you sitting?
So I am about an hour north of Denver in a town called Loveland, Colorado.
Nice, Loveland. And I mean, I'm not going to be beat around the bush. I'm a Coloradoan as well. Love
Awesome.
Loveland. Actually went to school in Fort Collins. I think we had this conversation, a couple of weeks ago. Fantastic. We're recording this and we're live right now, but we're recording this October 19th. I think the slopes are open, isn't it? Like the ski resort called Loveland, I'm pretty sure is open, isn't it?
I haven't been following it. My wife and I were avid snowboarders, or I'd still consider myself that. But we've been having little babies the last 3 years, so haven't gotten up there for a few years now.
Babies love the snow too, my friend. Babies
for sure. So we're hoping this year to get our older son is 3.5 right now, so we're hoping to get him up there this winter.
That is awesome, man. Wow. I remember those days. That was a long time ago, though, for me. You are the CEO of Bongo, but why don't you give us, the 60 seconds on who you are, how you came into this e-learning space, or this essentially this learning space, and just kind of set the stage for us.
Sure. Yeah. So, I work for Bongo. So I actually also went to Colorado State University up in Fort Collins.
Right.
And, basically, when I graduated, I worked for a middleware company. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, wanted to move to San Diego when she graduated, year behind me. So I quit that job and kind of put my feelers out. And one of my professors, Dr. Jeff Lewis, is the founder of Bongo. And I was, just asking, hey, do you know anyone in San Diego I could work for? And he said, why don't you try to, go sell the first iteration of Bongo? So we ended up moving into my, at the time, girlfriend's parents' basement. And I was effectively the first employee of Bongo. And we started in education. So I just, went around knocking on doors at different colleges and universities, talking about or trying to uncover problems or hardships in assessment and having learners give presentations. USC was my first sale.
Nice.
Over a decade ago now. They're still a customer of ours. We've just kind of grew organically for several years. And then about 5.5 years ago, that professor wanted to go back to teaching. And so he did that. And then I became the CEO. And then 2 years ago, we otherwise were organically grown. But 2 years ago, we raised institutional money from a fund called PeakSpan out of the Bay Area. And, our footprints probably about 50 to 60% of our user base is in education. The rest is in corporate L&D. But without a question, corporate L&D is growing significantly fast right now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people are saying that. What I got to ask, what is the name Bongo? Where did that come from? Like, what was that?
Yeah.
What's the genesis?
Yeah. So, we basically were trying to find a word or phrase that we could, own and, didn't have another company already having affiliation or ownership, if you will. And it was actually quite difficult, looking across both education market and corporate L&D market. We ultimately landed on Bongo and we thought there's a number of kind of cute marketing things we could do, like, beat to your own drum. And a big part of what our company or thesis as a company does is, help people be better communicators and be better at demonstrating their knowledge and applying what they learned in a classroom in a real world setting. Having there be some instrument affiliation was, we thought would just be a nice marketing angle, if you will. We landed on Bongo. Our URL is still bongolearn.com because we still haven't been able to get the bongo.com. It's actually owned by a denim company in Russia. So
of course,
So maybe someday we'll get that URL, but yeah, Bongo's where we live.
I think there's an incredibly there's a lot of incredible stories. I'm going to go off on just a little tiny tangent for a second. Of now that we're looking at 2024, the interwebs have been around for obviously a very long time. But let's take it back to like the .com boom at the beginning of the century. It's really interesting at some of the conferences, like the detritus of what is out there, that I feel like there's going to be all these stories. For example, there was one company that was brokering IP addresses, right? Because universities have all these IP addresses that are not being used, and so that they're running out, or there's not enough of them. But then again, it's like domain names. There's so many of them that are out there that somebody bought a long time ago, but then it's locked. Now it's locked up in some aggregator, in Tanzania, and just getting a hold of somebody and then negotiating a deal that's realistic is pain in the butt. Anyway, totally. I digress. I find that super fascinating. So we're here to talk about transferring learning from the classroom to the real world. I'm going to offer you the opportunity again to set the stage on this as well, because obviously, if you look through Bongo's site, you guys have been focusing on assessment, but there's a lot of tools that you have out there around coaching, around, different ways to give feedback to a learner and those kinds of things. What does that mean to you? Like, define that for me. This is it seems to be never-ending gap between the higher education space and the corporate learning, and the corporate space of, hey, I want to hire you, but how do I know that you can do this? Show me you've got the experience, but then the student's like, wait, I can't get the experience because, et cetera. Over to you.
Yeah, for sure. So what Bongo does is we scale observational assessment. So you can think of, in any area where you're trying to acquire knowledge. There's traditional forms of assessment like multiple choice and free response. Those do a great job validating that, you can regurgitate or remember what you just read. What Bongo does is, similar to having a manager or being called out in a classroom setting by the professor, asked an open-ended question and seeing how you respond. Bongo both captures that. So like we call it an authentic assessment. So we're having a learner record a video of themselves demonstrating some skill or competency. And then historically, we've had workflows where human evaluators can come in and provide coaching or evaluation, and again, validate that person can apply the knowledge that they just learned. Now, and really the last probably 3 years, we've really had a big focus on adding AI elements. So there's a handful of machine learning capabilities, but especially this year, we've added a lot of AI capability where it will, similar to a human evaluator, give coaching and feedback on like the delivery. So was that person being empathetic? What was their tone like? Were they confident or nervous? And then as well as pro tips on how to improve that delivery of knowledge representation. And then actually, literally today is a pretty major release that our engineers are launching, where it can basically evaluate in a contextual sense, right? So a professor, a coach, an expert, somebody authoring a video assignment that's, again, powered by Bongo, can benchmark the assessment to specific content, and the tool will give contextualized coaching and evaluate, was that, for instance, the learner represented 3 of the 4 core concepts that were delivered in this, again, ILT lesson or throughout this textbook. Here's the 4th one they missed on, and why it's important the next time that learner articulates this. And then it'll also evaluate people, again, similar to a human that goes in and evaluates or grades off of like a rubric per se. And it is like incredibly accurate, right? Like more often than not, less than 5% variance of how a human would score someone. So again, the thesis of Bongo is validating that knowledge can be applied in a real world application, and helping scale that observational assessment element.
So I asked this question to a lot of guests here, like what you've just described. It sounds like a no-brainer, right? It sounds like, of course, if I'm an employer, if I'm hiring, or if I'm upskilling or reskilling people in my organization, or if I'm onboarding or bringing in, attempting to bring in new people into my company, this is like, this is a no-brainer. What are the challenges that you usually hear? It's, from individuals when you're, either introducing Bongo or when, you talk about bridging that gap. What are the sticking points?
I would say the biggest challenge is, like, to be honest, status quo, right? It's easy to do it, through a multiple choice exam, the same way education's done things for 150 years. What we're offering or bringing to market is a better mousetrap, like a better way to evaluate if skills can actually be applied, right? So, and like a classic example would be having an organization publish or distribute to customer-facing teams like a white paper, and the thought is, okay, this is going to help our sellers sell, or our customer success people communicate value to our end customers. They should read it because it'll better their knowledge of our product or of this use case. But what often happens is people skim it, or they skip it and don't actually absorb the knowledge that's in that white paper, or any piece of content. And you may be able to check the box through a multiple choice exam of like, does that person remember, or can they skim it quickly and find the answer for that? What Bongo works towards, though, is a different way to evaluate. It evaluates people in a capacity of, can they actually like take these concepts and apply it in an actual customer conversation? And then Bongo will give them AI-driven coaching on how to improve communicating that, white
that
paper.
point, that value point, or whatever.
The knowledge that was hopefully just captured. So I would say the biggest objection is just status quo of, and especially this year, of course, the things that are fun to talk about, at least for me, are how AI is bringing more value and holding learners more accountable. But we've also added a lot of automated capability to make authoring a lot easier, right? So making it a lot less cumbersome for the instructor, for the manager to author this form of assessment. And again, that's why I kind of go back to like scaling observational assessment, because traditionally it's one-on-one, or the manager, looking over the shoulder of an employee. It's extremely hard to scale, even if it is the most authentic way or the most rigorous way to evaluate folks. And Bongo can do that now at unlimited scale with this new smart scoring capability.
How much fear have you found around, validating or bringing AI into this process? Again, it's just a sort of a sub question of that status quo, where it's, I'm either the hiring manager, or I am the HR professional, or I'm the professor, whatever, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm not sure I can quite trust this.
Totally.
Like, how are you like, two-part questions, like what do you say to those objections? And then what kind of aha moments have you seen from individuals who are like, oh, wait, this actually does work?
Yeah. So what we say and what is reality is our tool, what we're building, we're building it with the vision of scaling the evaluators or scaling the managers, right? So we're not trying to replace them. And for instance, some of the workflows, ask the instructor or the assignment author for like human validation, right? So it's, hey, this is, you can input the source material. Our tool will generate, here's the learning objectives that are likely being represented in the source material. Is that correct? And then the human, reviews that. And, it's an important step because, it could be 100 people, it could be 100,000 people that are evaluated based off that, checklist. And having a human validate that those are the right questions to be looking at, or those are the right learning objectives to be seeking. We feel like is a very important step and adds more, I guess, like accountability, but like also just like believability that like this tool is doing a good job, not just like, hallucinating. So there's, I guess the first part, your answer to the first part of the question is, we're building products to help scale people, and we're using AI to basically make their life easier. Nobody wants to sit through a 10-minute video and count how many times filler words are used. But
Right.
It's a pretty important, component of helping somebody articulate their knowledge more fluidly. And the AI can do that instantly, and at unlimited scale and at a lot cheaper of a rate than having to pay a human evaluator to count those mundane things. So that would be I guess, like how I would overcome that objection is, we're not trying to replace the human evaluator. We're trying to scale them and reduce the boring parts of evaluation. But then the other thing of just how have we seen it being used in the real world? Basically, and this is a really cool fact, I think, we have millions of users using our products in like most countries in the world. We have a footprint, so a huge global footprint. Across that user base, when AI is enabled, learners end up practicing 3.5 times more compared to pure human evaluation. And if so that's, for,
is that just because of availability and they're able to kind of do it on demand and whatnot, rather than scheduling with somebody, et cetera? Or is it really just like, hey, this is cool and it's better?
Sure. So we looked into that pretty deeply too. And so when you double click into like, why are people, when AI is enabled, using practicing a lot more? And it ends up, they feel, or their kind of reality is when it's feedback being provided by AI, they feel like a judgmental free zone, right?
Ooh,
like they don't feel like isn't that cool? Like they don't have that subconscious thoughts in their head of like, shoot, my manager is going to think I look silly, or I'm going to, screw this up, and ultimately when people practice how they're articulating their knowledge, one, it reinforces it quite a bit. So they end up learning it, more, and it combats the forgetting curve. But then they also, ultimately that workflow is practice it a number of times and then submit for final human evaluation. So it basically just leads to way better learning outcomes if they're practicing what they're being assessed on more. But yeah, it is that judgmental free. I'm not going to look like, a fool in front of my peers.
And the reason why I find that interesting, we've had other guests on the show here and lots of conversations around AI tools and whatnot. And I think one of the funny ones is, people apologize to ChatGPT. They thank it, and it's like, or oh, hey, thanks for that answer. So there is a personification there that's very robust. And so to hear that we're accepting of this feedback and this sort of interaction in your scenario, but it does not come with the same stigma as having like a supervisor with you. That's I think that's a really interesting slice or nuance in the findings. And
the other cool thing is that isn't just one specific use case. That's like pretty consistently across the board. So for frontline workers, like all the managers at Chick-fil-A, for instance, they're learning how to give constructive criticism, a little more fluidly to their employees or colleagues. So like, there's that I guess persona practices a ton to like other frontline workers like firefighters. We have a huge population in Canada where they're validating they can put their fire suits on, but then also having to talk about, put their fire suits on quickly, but also talk about what they're doing, just what they're doing and why they're doing it. So they're thinking about it, and having to have cognition take place. It's not just muscle memory. So like, there's, those are two totally different use cases, leadership, development and, just a vocational skill. But it goes to, also like, a ton of technology companies where they're just articulating product knowledge or overcoming sales objections or, practicing building rapport. All of those use cases, they all end up practicing more with AI coaching as opposed to just pure human evaluation. So again, just a cool finding.
Yeah, for sure. Fantastic. So if I'm I'm going to just take the role of the hiring manager.
Yeah.
What's what's my uptake in putting something like this together? Excuse me, where, I'm bringing this virtual assistant in to help me, scale assessment, et cetera. Am I responsible for figuring out what the data set is? Am I connecting to other data sets? Like, I guess take me first to the where, what data set am I using in order to train this thing
yeah,
just because you, like, for instance, you just gave Chick-fil-A managers and, firefighters in Canada as two different ones. Those are incredibly different data sets that you got to work around. So how does that work? And how do is that something that's in the company that you are ring fencing and saying, let's look at this, or what?
Yeah. So, I would two-part answer. One is there's two aspects of AI coaching and AI feedback. One is the delivery. So, were you confident or nervous, informative or persuasive? How empathetic were you? What's your tone? Things like that. That is it's different per language for sure. And there's nuances between English and Spanish for your speaking rate, for instance. So there is some differences, in a capacity, but generally the delivery is very standardized. So like there's no customization. It just gives feedback automatically depending on, and it'll automatically adjust for the language as well. So you just start speaking in Spanish, the tool will readjust. You have to speak for like 10 or 12 seconds. It'll readjust itself to that language. So but that's standardized, the delivery. Then there's the actual contextualized feedback. Did they get the concepts correct? Are they, saying the right thing? And that in the AI world, it's called a zero-shot approach that we're taking. So it's not sucking up the knowledge base out of the company and trying to train a giant, large, LLM. It's a philosophically different model that we're using, again, called zero-shot, where you submit a piece of source material. So it can be anything, right? So like for the firefighters, it's the quick start guide on putting your fire suit on. Nice. And the tool ingests that. So it's literally like a copy paste in as you're authoring assignments. It'll ingest that, and it uses the underlying. It's built as a microservice, so it's not necessarily one. It's not like just GPT or just BART or something. It's using the underlying algorithms of generative AI, but it's benchmarking itself off the knowledge or the materials in the source material. So I guess the more of a layman's way of saying that is it can be incredibly dynamic and span like any use case effectively. Of course, it's deeper. We have more utility with like power skills or customer facing roles or in education departments that are math. A math major is not going to use our product as deeply as like public speaking or language learning or an MBA program. So like there's different levels of utility. But if you wanted to, you could like literally put in from the math textbook, as the source material, put in like a description of, the difference between a derivative and antiderivative in calculus, and then ask the students an open-ended question of like, describe that difference. And, the tool will evaluate them based off of the material that was submitted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm obviously without sort of being able to visualize and see how the parts are, but I guess take me back to sort of maybe a more simple answer around for that hiring manager or that person who's in company XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a I can set up this tool in a day, a week? This is going to be this is a month that I'm going to have to kind of like bring this together, outside of going beyond the status quo, right? Where it's, I can see that change management, convincing leaders, putting this in my workflow, that could take longer, but I'm just like actually getting the tool up and running and like feeling confident, like I'm going to run it.
Yeah. So it, you can set it up in a long coffee break, right? You can start authoring assignments with like
that. You just reduced your $1 million idea to a coffee break, my friend. No,
yeah. Well, that it can be set up in 7 or 10 minutes. You can author assignments. It's really, what are you wanting to evaluate people on? And again, now that we've been able to come full circle, like in the past, we've required a human to do the evaluation. So it's not only deciding we're going to evaluate people with more rigor, hold them more accountable to the learning. Like, in my opinion, those are really important things. But in the past, it's been a huge amount of like effort and labor to watch, it's not just set the assignments up, but then you have to watch 20 10-minute videos and provide critique or fill out a rubric. You can still do that for sure. But now all that's required is to set the assignment up, and then the AI can hold them accountable, and the AI can give them coaching and feedback and pro tips on how to improve. And that human evaluator can come in and triage or look for outliers of people who scored low. Maybe that human goes in or the manager goes in and then watches, instead of 20 videos, they may watch the 2 that scored the lowest, and they can give more white glove treatment or attention to the students that need more attention. Setting it up is extremely fast. And like I mentioned earlier, the fun things to talk about are the AI coaching and like, how we're improving practice and improving learning outcomes. Some of the more practical or tactical benefits that, to be honest, from the building a company standpoint, probably have more association or correlation with money, selling the new deals, is it's really, we've put a bunch of automation into making it really easy to author this kind of assessment. So maybe that's hopefully a better way to answer the question.
100%. So take me to success stories. I mean, I assume that you get feedback from customers on a regular basis. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
And I'd love to hear if you can, like, I'd love to hear maybe where, again, it's always easy to put the positives out there. Yeah. I'd love to hear, it's like, hey, it didn't really work out in this instance, or, we discovered something that wasn't there and we had to make, we had to adjust, or, hey, this particular sector isn't so good for this. Like any kind of challenges like that?
Yeah, I would say, of course, there's lots of success stories, and, it spans like, tons of different industries, tons of different, applications or use cases. And it's, enterprise customers. We have like ServiceNow or Microsoft, or obviously monsters. We have huge universities and colleges using us in an enterprise or kind of across the board capacity. But also a lot of small, what would be considered SMB. So like, where it's 50 employees or 30 employees, and, having the manager who also wears a bunch of different hats go in and evaluate somebody's sales presentation. Like it's a massive distraction, and, it doesn't scale to do that without a tool like Bongo. So a long-winded way of saying lots and lots of use cases, lots of success stories. We have several hundred colleges and universities around the world that use our product. And, again, about the same number of corporate organizations too. But yeah, some of the applications where, or maybe like hardships, I guess I was just a little bit monologuing around authoring assignments, in the past, getting organizations to again think about it differently, of like, well, it's just easier if we buy some content from any content vendor, and push it on how to give constructive criticism. It's a lot, so like that's the status quo, is like, oh, we'll just buy this content and like kind of force everybody to watch it, and we'll measure them on whether they watched the 20-minute module.
Right.
I would argue that there's a very high chance that that's going to be a huge waste of money, because people push play and then they go back to their other screen and do emails, and maybe a multiple choice question comes up. And a lot of times those are designed, not really to hold the learner accountable to learning that thing, but just to get them to like complete it.
Right. I think that's why we call it compliance, right? I think that's
for sure. But it could be compliance in the traditional sense, but it could also be like, another cool use case is like doing, evaluating and doing assessment around like forklift training, right? Where they have, so people use our product where they, whip out their phone and have somebody go through the, 15-step checklist of how to drive a forklift safely. Now, if they're just watching a video and answering a multiple choice question, like there can be some bad, hard consequences if they're not truly learning that. And that's what Bongo's working, towards changing basically in the industry, is holding people more accountable to learning something and being able to apply it in a real world application. So I guess, to get back to the question of like where we've had some hardship, making it easy, we've had hardship in terms of just coming up with like, having people who are authoring assignments come up with like, how do I use this tool, right? Like it's a new kind of paradigm. That's, I think, again, in this release, being able to identify learning objectives, even if an educator or a manager is not even wanting to use the contextualized feedback, the smart scoring, if they're just wanting to like take a module and figure out, hey, our product marketing team just created this really nice sales enablement asset, but I'm not a subject matter expert. You can just punch that into the tool and it'll come up with, a recommendation of here's the learning objectives that the AI is identifying in this asset. So like that adds value in terms of just like thinking through, what are the important components of this thing.
Well, I wonder how often as well, like you come across, especially something, maybe a topic that's a little more complex, some technical skills or something like that, where the manager, or whomever believes that, okay, look, here's the 3 points that we need to pull out of this. And then the AI will come back and be like, actually, here's point number 4 and 5 that are actually kind of nuanced that, again, I don't know how that would happen because it's a ring, it's because it's, as you said, a 0-shot data set, that it couldn't go and compare, it's not comparative. It wouldn't be able to say, oh, I can contrast it to another thing. But I still think there would be discovery in there of like, oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, you
in this technical manual, actually, I didn't, we haven't been training towards point number 4 because we just haven't for some reason.
Well, and we like fully anticipate that's what's going to happen is it'll, kind of help open, help approach things in a more open-minded sense. And that's why at least, for right now, we're requiring the human valid, verification that like, yep, these learning objects or learning objectives are what's important. And, you just like check a box, you can, select it or deselect it, and then it's included or not included. But another, I guess, thing to mention is, authors can submit multiple assets, right?
Sure.
So you can submit, some knowledge-based articles, that white paper, and then maybe like the head of sales doing their own demo. So like a video of that, and the tool sifts through all of that, combines that knowledge. So it's not, it doesn't have to be like a singular point, like a one pager, right? It can be a handful of different elements that that it's being benchmarked off of.
Super cool. I'm
sure.
always surprised at how fast 35 minutes goes by here.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
My final question for you today is like, so what's next in the universe of assessment for you? I mean, you're launching a new product today, or a new iteration of your product today. Take me, 18 months out, 24 months out, like how does this continue to scale, grow, expand, evolve? Like what are you looking, like, what are you most excited about, I guess?
Yeah. I'm just the level of accuracy, benchmark, so what I'm most excited about right now is just the current release, because it is, and I'll answer in a larger capacity sec, but like, how closely it can mimic a human evaluator is like remarkable, right? It's we actually had to back it down in refinement cycles because the AI would grade harsher than a human evaluator. But it's, in some cases, it's less than 1% variance, right? So it's like indistinguishable from a human evaluation. So just being able to put that power into organizations and allow them to scale and have, basically hold learners more accountable to what they're supposed to be learning. I love geeking out about that. But just from then to answer your question more directly in terms of like, what the future holds, I think, continuing to go through refinement cycles and making it easier or even more accurate. The biggest thing for the next couple quarters is working towards allowing access in the easiest way, right? So again, we've done a lot of work in terms of making it really easy to author assessment, but like, I guess I don't want to be spilling all our secrets, if you will, but like, automatically coming up with questions, for instance. So like right now, we were looking at, should we, create a tool that you can submit source material like a module and it'll come up with questions for the author. We ultimately, went down the path of, well, let's identify the learning objectives first. And then the questions that are generated are going to be a lot more meaningful. So that's, I think a project that's going to be tackled in the next few months. But also just making it really easy and slick to be integrated into existing platforms or tools. So, making it so it doesn't have to be its own disjointed product, like a standalone solution. We want to, meet learners where they're actually learning. So, making it invisible inside of LMSs or inside of content organizations, marrying to existing content. So there's, some sophisticated ways that we're, working right now to be able to do that or facilitate it. And like I said, I basically want Bongo to be like the measuring stick of skill validation. And, especially in the corporate world, skills is like a really popular hot topic right now. And there's lots of, really cool skills ontologies or content that's, trying to teach skills in a more meaningful way. From my perspective, like what gets measured gets done. And if Bongo can be the measuring stick of, does that person truly have that skill? Not just like a self-proclamation on LinkedIn that, yeah, I'm really good at Excel and my buddy and my wife and my friend from college say that I am too. Like that doesn't mean anything. And so what we want to do is add more accountability to learning and skill validation. And yeah, I'm just excited to, rattle some cages in the industry. I think it's, putting this power into organizations' hands is I think going to change things. Josh
Kamrath, you are the CEO of Bongo. We've been talking about how you bring learning out of the classroom into the real world. I love this observational assessment. I'm going to carry that with me from this conversation. I absolutely love it. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day to speak with us.
Awesome.
I really appreciate it. Hope we get to talk again soon.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe on the slopes of those babies.
Right on. Yeah, totally. I'd love that for sure.